We're back to ask you a few more questions. I guess what we want to start with is also just to understand basically urban development and problems of a phenomenon of slums that we find a lot, which seems to be growing in Africa. And if you could comment a little bit about why you think that that is the case.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think in Africa today, over 1.5 billion people live in slum areas, and is growing rapidly in Africa. Precisely what slum means is an informal setting located either at the heart of the city or at the margins of the city. In particularly Africa, slum rapidly, is growing rapidly today in Africa, and in all the developed cities or semi-cities, there are lots of slum areas, informal settings, and is interestingly affecting African society today.
Okay, and I mean, I guess could you also explain what is different about slums in Africa versus in other contexts?
Yeah, I think the difference between slum in Africa and everywhere else is because during the colonial period, the restriction of commercial products, motivated Africans to shift their aspect of production from rural areas to the urban city in terms of work opportunities and better lifestyle. So, because of such restrictions in rural area, Africans basically shifted those initiative, in terms of farming, subsistence farming, and then they now migrated to the city because of the job opportunities there. So it's different in Africa in developed world because some of developed world slum areas are basically because where they segregated the blacks or the African Americans or wherever in Europe or in America. But here in Africa is a place that grew up as a result of colonialism or colonization. Africa never knew anything about slums until during this colonial period.
Okay, and so what would you say are and can you share any experiences of slum dwellers in Africa, as you know, as you're like an urban, a budding urban scholar?
Yes. While growing up, I grew up in an informal setting. I grew up in an informal setting, of course, what's in the global south people terms as slum or ghetto or where people, there are two types of people living in slums in Nigeria. There are people living in slums because they are comfortable to live in slum because of where their relatives are staying. And there are people who live in slum because of the high prices of renting or accommodation. So basically, these people living in slum based on the assumption that their relatives are staying there are not staying there because they don't have money, but they believe that while they live with their relatives or their loved one, they are creating a kind of bond and a kind of training initiative. Because in a couple of times I did a research about slums in Onitsha City, one of the British settlement areas in Nigeria. I found out specifically that people living in slums are either they are living it because of their relatives or their loved ones growing up there in terms of having a bond or training their children. Others are living in slum because of the high prices, in the city and tend to live in slums. And part of the experiences I got while I was staying in an informal area while growing up in Onitsha City is that there are a lot of poor sanitations. Also, fecal system is not also good. Water dispensing, which affects the system and also the people living there, and also causes health hazards and some of environmental degradation, not only in that place but also in the entire city.
And what would you say is the future of slum areas then in Africa?
the future of slum areas, and as I mentioned earlier, that currently in Africa, over 1.5 billion people are living in slum, and the statistics are saying that by 2072, if the measures are not being put in place, over 2 billion Africans will live in slum. The future of Africa is for urban renewal. The government should initiate kind of maybe, if I don't mistake, about gentrification, urban renewal, and also advance education in terms of what a slum should look like or how it should be incorporated in the city. I'm not advocating for people to be chased away in their lived places, but I'm saying that the government should incorporate in terms of maybe constructing or establishing less cheap houses, so that these people living in slums can temporarily migrate to these places as they deal with some of the problems created by already existing slums in Africa. So for Africa to get this vision of United Nations by 2030, both individual, the government should sow themselves into urban renewal, and by doing that, incorporating some of the lapses that has already been ignited in terms of people living in slums, I think it will bring a kind of better future before 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals will end.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. This is very helpful.
Thank you.